The avoidant has vanished. No warning, no explanation, just sudden, complete silence where there used to be contact. Your messages go unanswered. Your calls go to voicemail. The connection that seemed to be building has been severed without a word. You're sitting in the confusion, wondering what you did wrong, replaying every interaction, searching for the moment you pushed them away. But here's the truth that seems impossible. The avoidant isn't ignoring you because you became too much, or because they lost interest, or because you did something wrong. They're ignoring you because they're falling for you, and falling for you terrifies them more than anything else in their psychological universe. The harder they're falling, the more intensely they need to create distance. The deeper their feelings become, the more desperately they need space. The more they care about you, the less they can be around you. This is the avoidant paradox, and understanding it is crucial to not taking their disappearance personally or making it mean something about your worth. This isn't about all ignoring from all avoidance in all situations. Sometimes an avoidant ignores you because they genuinely aren't interested, because the connection isn't significant, because you're just another person they're casually dismissing. The key is distinguishing between dismissive ignoring and terrified ignoring. Dismissive ignoring is consistent from the start. The avoidant was always lukewarm, always distant, never really engaged. But terrified ignoring is different. It comes after a period of genuine connection. It arrives when things are actually going well. It happens right after moments of real intimacy or vulnerability. The avoidant was opening up, you were getting closer, the relationship was deepening, and then suddenly they're gone. That pattern, ignoring after connection, is the signature of an avoidant who's falling and can't handle what they're feeling. What you need to understand is that for the avoidant, falling in love doesn't feel like falling in love. It feels like dying. It feels like losing control. It feels like being consumed. It feels like every wound from their childhood is being activated simultaneously. The beautiful feelings that should accompany developing attachment are completely overwhelmed by terror so profound, the avoidant's entire nervous system goes into emergency mode. And the emergency response is to create distance immediately, to cut off contact, to make space between themselves and the source of the overwhelming feelings. You're not being ignored because you matter too little. You're being ignored because you matter too much. And the avoidant doesn't know how to tolerate mattering to someone or having someone matter to them without feeling like their survival is threatened. The specific context that creates ignoring as a response to falling. The avoidance ignoring isn't random. It follows specific triggers that signal to their nervous system that they're in danger of becoming too attached. The first trigger is experiencing genuine vulnerability with you. Maybe the avoidant shared something they never share, opened up about their past, revealed fears or insecurities they typically hide. In the moment of sharing, they might have felt relief or connection. But afterwards, when they're alone processing what happened, panic sets in. They showed you something real. They gave you information you could use to hurt them. They revealed weakness that makes them feel exposed. The vulnerability hangover is so intense that the avoidant needs to create immediate distance, and ignoring is the fastest way to create that distance. The second trigger is realizing they've been thinking about you constantly. The avoidant notices you're occupying significant mental space. They catch themselves wondering what you're doing, wanting to tell you things that happen in their day, looking forward to seeing you. This level of preoccupation is terrifying because it signals attachment, and attachment feels dangerous. The avoidant interprets their constant thoughts about you as evidence they're losing themselves, becoming dependent, developing the kind of need that led to pain in their past. So they go silent, cutting off contact in an attempt to stop thinking about you, to regain the mental independence that feels essential to their survival. The third trigger is feeling happy with you in ways that scare them. The avoidant has a period of genuine enjoyment in your company. They laugh more than usual. They feel relaxed. They experience moments where their defenses drop and they're just present with you. But this happiness becomes frightening because happiness means they'll be devastated if they lose you. The avoidance psychology tells them that anything that makes you happy is dangerous because losing it will make you proportionally miserable. So they preemptively create the loss by ignoring you, attempting to control when the loss happens rather than waiting for the inevitable moment when you realize they're too damaged and leave them. The fourth trigger is you demonstrating that you're genuinely good for them. You show patience with their fear. You create safety through consistency. You don't punish their vulnerability. You accept their need for space without making it mean something catastrophic. You're being exactly the kind of partner they need, and this is absolutely terrifying. The avoidant is accustomed to people who confirm their worst fears about relationships, but you're contradicting those fears, proving that intimacy can be safe, that vulnerability doesn't automatically lead to pain. And this contradiction creates cognitive dissonance so intense that the avoidant needs to escape. They ignore you to avoid continuing evidence that challenges their core beliefs about love being dangerous. The internal experience that produces external ignoring, what's happening inside the avoidant while they're ignoring you, is a full-scale emotional crisis. They're not casually blowing you off. They're drowning in feelings they don't know how to process. They want to contact you and they're terrified of contacting you. They miss you desperately and they need the distance desperately. They're thinking about you constantly while trying to convince themselves you don't matter that much. The internal contradiction is tearing them apart, creating psychological chaos that's overwhelming their capacity to function normally. Ignoring you is their attempt to reduce the chaos by eliminating one variable, your actual presence in their life. The avoidant is experiencing something they identify as relationship claustrophobia. Even though you might not be demanding much from them, even though you might be giving them plenty of space, the avoidant feels suffocated. The suffocation isn't about your actual behavior. It's about their internal experience of developing attachment. Attachment itself feels like walls closing in. Caring about you feels like being trapped. Needing you feels like imprisonment. So they ignore you to create breathing room, to escape the feeling of suffocation that's actually coming from inside them, not from you. While ignoring you, the avoidant is also fighting with themselves about whether to reach out. Part of them desperately wants to contact you, to explain what's happening, to maintain the connection. But another part is convinced that reaching out would be weak, would signal need, would give you power over them. The internal battle is constant and exhausting. They compose messages in their head that they never send. They pick up their phone to contact you dozens of times before putting it down again. They're not easily peacefully ignoring you. They're torturing themselves about ignoring you while feeling unable to do anything different. The avoidant is also using the ignoring period to try to convince themselves they don't need you. They're reminding themselves of all the reasons relationships are complicated. They're focusing on your flaws or incompatibilities. They're listing all the ways they're better off alone. They're trying to talk themselves out of their feelings by cataloging reasons you're not right for them. This cognitive strategy is an attempt to reduce the pain of creating distance. If they can convince themselves you're not that great, ignoring you becomes easier to justify. But the strategy usually fails because underneath all the rationalizations, they know you're exactly what they want, and they're pushing you away because they're terrified of wanting anyone. But here's where this gets complicated. The avoidance ignoring can destroy what they're trying to protect. The avoidant is ignoring you because they're falling for you and they need space to manage their fear. But you don't know that. From your perspective, you're being ignored by someone you were building connection with. And the ignoring feels like rejection. You're making it mean something about your worth, about whether you matter to them, about whether the connection was real. And in response to feeling rejected, you're likely pulling back emotionally, protecting yourself, starting to detach. The avoidance strategy to manage their fear by creating space is actually creating the outcome they fear most, you giving up on them and moving on. The tragedy is that what the avoidant needs during this ignoring period is for you to somehow maintain steady presence without pressure, to give them space without disappearing, to understand their silence isn't rejection without them having to explain it. But this is an impossible ask. Most people can't maintain their own emotional equilibrium while being ignored. Most people interpret silence as lack of interest and protect themselves by withdrawing. So the avoidance coping mechanism for falling in love actively destroys their chance at having the love they're developing feelings about. They ignore you to manage their overwhelm, and the ignoring creates distance that becomes permanent because you reasonably protect yourself from someone who can't show up consistently. The signs that distinguish falling-related ignoring from genuine disinterest. Understanding whether an avoidant is ignoring you because they're falling or because they're genuinely not interested requires looking at the context and the pattern. The first sign that ignoring is about falling is that it comes after demonstrable connection. You had real conversations. You shared vulnerable moments. There was chemistry and genuine engagement. The avoidant was actually showing up, actually present, actually connecting. If the ignoring arrives after this kind of depth, it's much more likely to be fear-based than disinterest-based. Disinterested avoidants never really engage in the first place. They keep things surface level and casual from the start. The second sign is that the ignoring has a sudden quality to it. One day, the avoidant is warm and engaged, and the next day, they're gone. There's no gradual cooling off, no slow fade. It's a dramatic shift from connection to silence. This sudden quality suggests something happened internally for the avoidant. Some threshold was crossed that activated their fear. If someone is genuinely losing interest, it usually shows up as gradual decrease in enthusiasm and engagement, not sudden disappearance after things were going well. The third sign is observable distress in the avoidant before they disappear. Maybe they seemed anxious during your last interaction. Maybe they said something like, "This is moving too fast," or "I don't know if I'm ready for this," before going silent. Maybe you sensed them pulling back emotionally, even though they were still physically present. These signs of discomfort signal that the avoidant is struggling with their feelings, not that they don't have feelings. Someone who's genuinely disinterested doesn't struggle. They just lose interest and move on without internal conflict. The fourth sign is that during previous periods of connection, the avoidant showed signs of actually caring about you. They remembered details about your life. They checked in on you when you were going through something difficult. They went out of their way to do things for you. They showed jealousy or protectiveness. They made plans for future experiences together. These behaviors indicate emotional investment. If emotional investment was clearly present before the ignoring started, the ignoring is more likely about the avoidant managing their feelings than about lack of feelings. The fifth sign is if the avoidant eventually reaches back out with some excuse about why they went silent. They were busy. They were dealing with something. They had to focus on work. The excuse is usually legitimate, but feels insufficient to explain the complete radio silence. What the excuse reveals is that the avoidant is trying to maintain connection despite their fear. They disappeared because they needed space, but they came back because they couldn't stay away. This pattern of disappearing and returning is classic avoidant behavior when they're falling for someone and trying to manage the terror of that falling. Why this pattern is so damaging to potential relationships. The avoidance pattern of ignoring when they're falling creates relationship dynamics that are often impossible to sustain. The first issue is that it trains you to associate getting closer with being abandoned. You open up, the avoidant disappears. You have a great time together, the avoidant goes silent. You start developing real feelings, the avoidant vanishes. This creates anxious attachment in you. Even if you entered the relationship relatively secure, you learn that intimacy is followed by rejection. And this learning makes you afraid of intimacy, hypervigilant about the avoidant's mood and availability, constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. The pattern also prevents the relationship from developing any momentum. Relationships need consistent contact and escalating intimacy to grow. But with an avoidant who ignores when they're falling, you get bursts of connection followed by periods of silence that reset everything. You never build on previous intimacy because the intimacy triggers disappearance. You're constantly starting over, never able to deepen the connection because deepening triggers the avoidance fear. The relationship exists in a perpetual holding pattern where it can't die but also can't thrive. The ignoring pattern also destroys trust. Trust requires reliability. You need to know that someone will be there, that they'll communicate, that they won't just vanish when things get real. But the avoidant who ignores when they're falling is fundamentally unreliable. You can't trust that yesterday's closeness means tomorrow's presence. You can't count on them being available when you need them. You can't assume that vulnerability will be met with continued engagement. The lack of trust makes real intimacy impossible because intimacy requires the safety of knowing someone won't abandon you for getting close. The pattern is damaging because it puts all the emotional labor on you. You're the one having to interpret the silence. You're the one deciding whether to reach out or give space. You're the one managing your own anxiety about their disappearance. You're the one trying to maintain the connection while they're absent. The avoidant gets to escape into silence while you do the work of holding the relationship together. This asymmetry is exhausting and unsustainable. Eventually, most people stop doing the work because the cost is too high. What you're supposed to do with this information, understanding that an avoidant might be ignoring you because they're falling for you, doesn't tell you what to do about it. The first option is to give them space and see if they come back. This means not chasing, not demanding explanation, not making their silence mean something about your worth. You maintain your dignity and your own life while leaving the door open for them to return when they're ready. Some avoidants will return, will apologize for disappearing, will try to explain what happened. If they come back with genuine effort to do better, with willingness to communicate about their patterns, with commitment to working on their avoidance, there might be potential for relationship if you're willing to be patient. The second option is to reach out once with clear, non-demanding communication. You might say something like, "I've noticed you've gone quiet and I'm giving you space. I don't know what's happening for you, but I want you to know I'm here if you want to talk. If you need time to process, I understand. But I also need consistency in relationships. So I can't be in a dynamic where someone disappears without communication. Take the time you need and let me know if you want to continue building what we started." This communication gives the avoidant information about your boundaries while not pressuring them for immediate response. It opens the door while being clear about your needs. The third option is to recognize that someone who ignores you when they're developing feelings is someone who lacks the skills for healthy relationship, regardless of why they're ignoring you. Even if the ignoring is about falling for you, even if it's rooted in fear rather than disinterest, it's still behavior that's incompatible with what you need. You can have compassion for their fear while refusing to accept treatment that hurts you. You can understand their patterns while choosing not to participate in dynamics those patterns create. Understanding why they're ignoring you doesn't obligate you to stay available while they work through their issues. The fourth option is to use this experience as information about whether you want to be with an avoidant at all. Knowing that the avoidant ignores when they're falling means understanding that this pattern will likely continue. Every time the relationship deepens, every time they feel themselves caring more, they'll potentially need space. Are you willing to be in a relationship with someone whose response to falling for you is to disappear? Are you okay with a dynamic where increased intimacy triggers increased distance? These aren't rhetorical questions. Some people can be patient with avoidant patterns if the avoidant is actively working on themselves. But many people recognize that this dynamic is too painful and too dysfunctional to participate in. The reality check you need: while it's true that some avoidants ignore when they're falling, it's crucial not to use this framework to excuse all ignoring or to stay in situations that are hurting you. The question isn't just, are they ignoring me because they're falling? The questions are, is this behavior acceptable to me regardless of the reason? And am I willing to be with someone who handles developing feelings by disappearing? The answer to the second question might be no, and that's completely legitimate. You also can't know for certain what's happening inside the avoidant. You can't read their mind or diagnose their feelings. All you can do is observe behavior and decide whether that behavior is acceptable to you. Even if they are falling for you, even if their ignoring is fear-based, they're still ignoring you. they're still creating pain for you through their inability to communicate. They're still asking you to tolerate silence and inconsistency, and you're allowed to decide that's not what you want, regardless of the psychological reasons behind it. The reality check also includes recognizing that someone who ignores you when they're falling is someone who will need extensive therapy to be capable of healthy relationship. This isn't a small issue that will resolve on its own. This is deep attachment wounding that requires professional intervention and sustained work. Most avoidants don't do this work. They continue their patterns, hurting person after person who cares about them. If you're considering staying with an avoidant who ignores when they're falling, you need to ask whether they're actually in therapy, actively working on their patterns, demonstrating real growth over time. If they're not doing the work, their patterns won't change and you'll experience the ignoring cycle repeatedly. Understanding doesn't equal accepting. You can understand completely that an avoidant is ignoring you because they're falling for you, that their disappearance is about their fear rather than your inadequacy, that their silence is their attempt to manage overwhelming feelings. Understanding all of this is important for not making their behavior mean something about your worth, but understanding doesn't require accepting. You can understand their psychology and still refuse to participate in dynamics it creates. Understanding the avoidance patterns is valuable for protecting your self-esteem. When they ignore you, you can remind yourself it's about their capacity, not your value. You can recognize that their behavior reflects their wounding, not your lovability. You can maintain your sense of worth while they're absent because you understand the absence isn't a referendum on you. This understanding prevents the internalized damage that comes from interpreting someone's avoidance as your failure. But understanding should also clarify what you're signing up for if you stay. You're choosing a relationship with someone who handles intimacy through distance, someone who responds to caring by disappearing, someone who will need significant time and professional help to develop capacity for sustained closeness, someone whose best case scenario still involves managing their fear constantly. Understanding makes this choice conscious rather than naive. You're not staying because you don't understand what's happening. You're staying with full knowledge of the patterns, which means you have to take responsibility for that choice and its consequences. Understanding also means recognizing when to stop understanding and start requiring change. You can understand someone's patterns and still establish boundaries about what behavior you'll accept. You can have compassion for their fear and still require them to communicate instead of disappearing. You can know why they're ignoring you and still decide that the ignoring is unacceptable regardless of its source. Understanding becomes enabling when it's used to justify staying in situations that consistently hurt you without any evidence that the person is doing work to change. The avoidant who ignores when falling can change, but it requires specific conditions. Some avoidants who ignore when they're falling eventually develop capacity for healthier relating, but the transformation requires specific conditions that are often absent. The first condition is the avoidant hitting rock bottom. They need to lose enough people they care about that the cost of their patterns becomes undeniable. They need pain that exceeds their fear of vulnerability. They need to reach a point where continuing their avoidance is more painful than facing their wounds. For many avoidants, this rock bottom never comes. They lose people and construct defensive narratives that prevent learning from the losses. They blame others or circumstances rather than examining their own patterns. The second condition is the avoidant getting into consistent therapy with a therapist who specializes in attachment. Not just any therapy, not therapy they attend sporadically when they're feeling bad. Consistent, long-term therapy specifically focused on attachment wounds. The avoidant needs to work with someone who can help them understand why intimacy triggers fear, how to tolerate emotional intensity without fleeing, how to communicate about their needs instead of acting them out through withdrawal. This therapeutic work takes years, not months. And most avoidants don't have patience or motivation for this kind of sustained work. The third condition is the avoidant wanting to change for themselves, not for any specific relationship. If they're trying to change to keep you or win you back, the motivation won't sustain the difficult work required. The moment things stabilize with you, the motivation disappears. Real change requires the avoidant recognizing their patterns limit their entire life, not just their romantic relationships. They need to want secure attachment because they want to be less afraid, less lonely, more capable of genuine connection. This internal motivation is rare because most avoidants are comfortable enough with their patterns that they don't feel urgent need to change. The fourth condition is time. Even with rock bottom therapy and internal motivation, change is slow. The avoidant needs years to develop new neural pathways, new responses to intimacy, new capacity for vulnerability. And during those years, they'll still have moments of reverting to old patterns. They'll still sometimes need excessive space. They'll still occasionally feel overwhelmed by intimacy. Change isn't linear. There will be progress and regression. If you're waiting for the avoidant to change so you can have a relationship, you're likely waiting for years while they do work they may not even be doing. The bottom line, their ignoring isn't about you, but your response should be about you. An avoidant might be ignoring you because they're falling for you. Their silence might be about their overwhelming feelings rather than their lack of feelings. Their disappearance might be fear of how much you matter rather than evidence that you don't matter. All of this might be true, but the bottom line is that regardless of why they're ignoring you, you're still being ignored. You're still experiencing the pain of someone's absence. You're still in a dynamic where getting close is followed by abandonment, and you have to decide whether understanding the psychology behind the behavior makes the behavior acceptable to you. Your response should be based on what you need, not on what you understand about their fears. If you need consistency, someone who ignores you can't provide it, regardless of their reasons. If you need communication, someone who goes silent when they're overwhelmed can't meet that need. If you need reliability, someone who disappears when they're falling can't be relied on. Your understanding of their patterns doesn't change the impact those patterns have on you, and you're allowed to prioritize your needs over their fears. Being ignored by an avoidant might be a sign they're falling for you, but it's also a sign they're not ready for relationship with you or anyone. Falling for someone should draw you closer, not drive you into hiding. Developing feelings should motivate communication, not silence. Caring about someone should make you want to show up, not disappear. The avoidant who ignores when they're falling is showing you they lack capacity for the basic building blocks of healthy relationship: presence, consistency, communication. You can have compassion for why they lack that capacity while refusing to build a relationship on such unstable foundation. Understanding them is generous. Requiring more from them is self-respect. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for both of you is to stop accepting behavior that hurts you, regardless of the fear that drives it.